everyone. So today I wanted to take some time to explore different critical perspectives to the mainstream liberal Western and male approach to democracy and citizenry. So far, we have mainly seen the male, while white and Western opinion and about why and how we live together. But there are many authors that take some different approaches, somehow from the margins of the system and margins of this mainstream political thought. So, for instance, there is the anti colonialism perspective that understands that part of the development of the political and economic systems is the result of what happened during the colonialist period, and that these the social relations, the political and economic relations are the result of this colonialist past. So during this period there were, of course, countries that were oppressing and countries that were oppressed, and these kind of authors understand that this colonialist past, can explain the way that we still interact between us today. So this is a kind of approach that will be different to the liberal or mainstream approach that we have analyzed so far, even from the Marxist perspective, right? There are other kind of theories that can have a different approach from the margins, I'll say. So there will be, for instance, the feminists. Feminists put women at the center and they look at the world from a feminist perspective, which means eliminating discriminations against women. So first of all, acknowledging that there are these kind of discriminations and then trying to eliminate them. So understanding not only to what extent women are discriminated in a Western democracy, but also trying to help us to see the world, the whole world, the man's behavior and how democracies work and how democracies and the whole system function and is structured, using populance, right? Seeing everything from a feminist perspective, not only women's behavior, but the whole system from a feminist perspective. There are other approaches, for instance, the nationalists, that kind of try to have a different approach to how systems, how states are based and how they work, like people decide to live together and remain together in a democratic system or in another kind of political system. So as you might saw from the readings, there's the Renan approach. He has an interesting approach also, although he's from the 19th century, to the nation, that is very interesting because he analyzed that maybe there were a kind of idea about the state as something homogeneous, right, with no national or cultural groups, in which everyone was kind of equal, at all the same, and what might only differentiate these the people, us, is our access to the system or class or even or capacity to be part of the political or cultural or economic elite, right? But we have seen different approaches to differentiation of groups, right? From the Marxist perspective, for instance, that is based on economic terms, and other perspectives that look at what were the elites, for instance, the political or bureaucratic elite. Look at what was analyzed by Weber or Schumpeter, right? But so far we didn't analyze a lot about cultural differences or national differences. But cultural difference, for instance, might have an impact on how people, the relation that people have to the system or among them in a democratic system or a non-democratic system. So nations and cultures are also part of the differences that we have. And even in a same state, right? Inside in a state, there might be different nations or different cultural groups that might have a different approach to the system or a different approach to their rights or their discrimination that they might be suffering from a system created by people that see the state or the system as an homogeneous group, right? So Renan looked at the national aspect, and others, such as the multiculturalists, look at the cultural aspect. You will find on the reading list Tariq Mudud approach on that. All these theories, like the rest that we have seen so far in this course, can, of course, be somehow mixed, right? So, for instance, you can be an anti-colonialist feminist, or you can be a liberal feminist or a Marxist feminist. So this is something that more than like a block of theories, it can be a different approach to mainstream theories. It can be a theory in itself, but it can also be mixed. I will come back to this idea a little bit later on the video. So let me first start with Renan and his discourse on what is a nation. So as I said, it's an old discourse. He is from the 19th century, but I thought that it was interesting to look at it because his ideas are still very actual, although it might be contested and it could have a lot of it can be, of course, criticized by many people. I think that the main idea that he has about the nation and why and how it is structured and what is the basis of a nation is interesting still nowadays. So for him, a nation is not formed by a common language, for instance, or a race or religion or territory. So for instance, France is not France because they all or most of them share the same language or a same territory, that was created after a period of wars and reunification and alliances between kings and whatever, or even the idea that it will be kind of formed by people that share the same religion or a race. But for Renan, the idea is very much about democracy, even inside the idea of a nation, because for him is a daily referendum. You will find it on the reading between individuals that share a common history and agree to live together for a common goal, right? So it's less about something how to say that is less about something that it is like this, that it has been like this, and that it will always be like this, because we all have the same language. We must remain together. Is more about the people's will and the people's feeling about feeling part of a group, feeling part of a community, and feeling part of a community that in a daily referendum you they all agree to still live together, right? So, for instance, if we look at the United States and the UK, we all agree that they share the same language. But of course, they are not the same nation nor country, right? It used to be at a certain time, but it is not the case anymore. So the point is that they have been separated because at a certain point, people understood they were different and they didn't want to live together. So they felt that they were a different nation. So they must have a different state and different formal institutions and structures. So nations are based, according to Renan, on what people jointly remember and forget about their past and about what they are and what they share. And this is interesting because Renan is considered a constructivist. That means that he believes nations are nothing, are not natural or unquestionable or something that will be always the same. Nations are socially constructed through time because people believe they are part of it, you know? So it's interesting to look at this from this approach, less about something eternal or natural or unquestionable, but something that is being created and that people are part of this creation. They decide at a certain time what is their common history. They decide at a certain moment what is important in living together, what is important in their community. So whether is it important that this group of people they share the same language, or is more important that they share a common history or that they share a common will to do that on that. Remember what was the case in the U.S. We had a look on the U.S. independence declaration, and there's a lot about religion, but there's also a lot about a group of people feeling that they are different from the English, right? So the consequences of this very basic idea of Renan is that what is important in a nation is the desire to continue forming part of this nation. So if a nation or a group that is consider itself as a nation, at a certain point they want to, they want to be part of another state, or they want to create their own state. There is no ground for justifying that these people have to remain in the same state together with a bigger group, right? For instance, if you look at, I always put the same example, but if you look at what happened with the independence movement in Catalonia, these kind of arguments, are very, very much behind all the arguments of the independentist, Catalan independentists, that they say that we are a nation, Catalans are a nation, because they believe that they are. It's not that this something that is based on rules or is based in a constitution that accepts or whatever, or a law or whatever. It's about how you feel. And if a group of people feel that they are a nation and they want to create their own state, according to Renan, it is kind of legitimate, because you can use the national argument to force people to live with you when they feel that they are a different nation. You know, you can use different arguments, for instance, that it would be more convenient for all of us to live together because in economic terms or political terms or whatever. But you can use the national argument because you cannot say to someone, to a group, that they are nations if they feel so, right? Let me now move to Okin and his approach to feminism. You may remember that we have discussed that that there are different perspectives to feminism. We look at the liberal and the Marxist perspective very quickly, but of course there are other approaches to feminism. Traditional, there are kind of three big families, three big groups: the liberal feminisms, the Marxist or socialist feminism, and feminists, and the radical feminists. The liberal feminists, kind of called the mainstream feminist, is the main branch of feminism that is defined by its focus on achieving gender equality through political and legal reform within the framework of liberal democracy. So, it is a lot about formal equality. Remember Mary Wollstonecraft, right? This is the oldest school of feminism. It started in 19th century or even a little bit before with Mary Wollstonecraft. All these women that started realizing, you know, that they were discriminated and they wanted to be part of the system. But they put their focus on education, access to education, women's suffrage, and a lot about the entrance of women on formal structures. So they wanted to integrate women into the structure. But there's a different approach to feminism that is more the socialist or the Marxist feminists that analyze the ways in which women are exploited through capitalism. So very specifically, how women suffer from capitalism and the individual ownership of private property. So according to Marxist feminists, women's liberation can only be achieved by dismantling the capitalist system in which they contend much of women's labor is uncompensated. So it's a lot about what women do in a capitalist system that discriminates them in a materialistic sense, right? So it's a lot about how they suffer in the labor or in access to the property or to the market. So it's just trying to understand how Marxism explains the world and understanding to what extent women are discriminated as a group in this system and in this, looking from this critical approach. And finally, this is this huge group of feminists that is considered, like, it's called radical feminists. That is a perspective within feminism that calls for a radical reordering of the society in which male supremacy is eliminated in all social and economic contexts, while recognizing that women's experiences are also affected by other social divisions such as race, class, sexual orientation. So this ideology and movement has emerged in the 1960s, more or less, and it's less about material or formal discriminations, but about the discrimination that women suffer from social divisions in terms of race, class, or sexual orientation. So there's a large, perspective of that try to understand to what extent in any aspect of their lives women are discriminated in society. So if we look at Okin's approach, he writes from a liberal perspective, right? But she analyzed very, from a very interesting perspective, I might say, to what extent multiculturalism, and we will have a look on that in a while, multiculturalism can harm women kind of using the excuse of respecting tradition, in another culture. So for Hawking, some group rights can in fact endanger women. So she tries to point that certain cultures or traditions discriminate women, and this discrimination is kind of part of the culture. So it justified as it was part of the culture. But she said that the problem of kind of protecting this cultural difference, accepting this discrimination, is from a feminist perspective, it's a problem, because any culture can be disrespectful for women's rights, but we have to pay attention on what is really culture and what is just discrimination against women, in order to emancipate all women, even when they have different cultural traditions. So Hawking argued that if we agree that women should not be disadvantaged because of their sex, we should not accept group rights that would protect certain cultural, certain traditions, because that permit oppressive practices on the grounds of and that they are fundamental to minority cultures. But this discrimination, according to Hawking, is never justified, never legitimate. But of course, there are some authors that do believe that cultural difference might be protected. Even if they might look or not at this discrimination of women's. There are some authors, and this is the multiculturalist approach, that look at the cultural differences, arguing that cultures must be protected, and we have to acknowledge that there's a kind of domination of a certain political culture that discriminate other cultures and other political cultures and contexts and traditions. So multiculturalism is the view that cultures, races, and ethnicities, particularly those of minority groups, deserve special acknowledgement of their differences within a dominant political culture. So Murad, as you have certainly read from the reading list, he argues that cultural minorities need to be protected. He writes at a time in which there are many people, many public commentators that are turning against multiculturalism. So this idea of protecting the difference, like culture and the traditions, because of their fear of militant Islam, immigration, and social cohesion. So they think that maybe because we are protecting too much cultural differences, we are encouraging a certain alienation of groups, and then we are kind of creating too much difference between the groups, and there are not understanding between the groups, and we are not creating social cohesion among certain shared values about how we must behave in a democratic system, what are the women's rights, and this kind of certain common values. According to Mudud, he thinks that the rise of Islamic terrorism has neither discredited multiculturalism nor created the clash of civilizations. You might know this concept of the clash of civilizations. It is about how cultures and civilizations can cannot cooperate and not work together because they are so different, too different. But he is against this idea. He thinks that inclusion is not possible sometimes when liberalism or a certain liberal perspectives is imposed, because he does believe that different minorities sometimes need to be accommodated in different ways. But a single template, liberal template, is not appropriate for everyone, every time, everywhere. He suggests that such differential accommodation or multiculturalism cannot be the task of a state alone, but must be shared across different civil society sectors. He sees that the revival of ideological secularism, such, for instance, it is the case. It might be the case in France, is an obstacle to multicultural integration, and it is important to understand that there is no political system that is neutral. They're all part of a culture. They all represent a cultural perspective, and they all have their own tradition. They are not like universal values. They are different cultures, and they all have different approaches to living together. And there is a need to accommodation of different groups, but not trying to impose this kind of supposed neutral state. It is important to look at the difference and try to protect the difference and try to find common ground and common points of agreement between different groups. I hope that was a very quick but useful explanation of the readings. We'll have some time on Monday to look at all these authors, and please make sure to make the readings. They are on the virtual campus, and we will have, as I said, some time to discuss about that on Monday, and I will send you another video as I explained it last week with some instructions about the final essay that I hope will be useful for you. So have a nice weekend and have a nice week, and see you in a few days. Bye.